Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about something that we're probably all very familiar with, which is processed foods. But there's some new data out that really talks about the impact that processed foods have on us. I want to go through some of those studies, as well as talk about some things we can do if we so choose, if we want to minimize or mitigate the amount of processed foods that we're consuming on an ongoing basis. Okay. So that is tonight's presentation. I'm really excited about sharing some of this information with you. And at the end, we're going to have 3 or 4 questions we're going to go back and forth and dialogue about to help and support each other. So of course, we've got the disclaimer. This presentation is for educational and informational purposes only, and solely as a self-help tool for your own use. I'm not providing medical, psychological, or nutritional therapy or advice. You should not use this information to diagnose or treat any health problems or illnesses without consulting your own medical practitioner. Always seek the advice of your own medical practitioner and or mental health professional provider about your specific health situations. For my full disclaimer, just go to coachmikethomas.com. And this is me. I am a health coach. I'm board certified as a health coach, trained at, I don't know if you can see there, I was trained at the Mayo Clinic. I'm board certified as a health coach and in lifestyle medicine. And if you're watching this online, just as a heads up, this call that we're having right now is a call that we've had for probably 3+ years on usually the first Tuesday of the month, where we talk about just health issues regarding plant-based eating, trying to be healthy, getting some good movement, minimizing stress, social support, etc. And quite frankly, social support is one of the logistical functions of this call. There's more information for me. There's a QR code if you want to know more information about me. There's a QR code on your screen. My website is coachmikethomas.com, and my email address is there as well. Okay, so getting into the thick of it with regards to processed foods. So just take a step back and think about, America and how we're consuming so many processed foods. This is what we know today based on convenience, based on these foods are relatively inexpensive for those calories, and that these are really tasty. This trend of consumption of processed foods has significantly increased just in the last 50 years. Pretty straightforward, but I think we're so used to what we see on a day-to-day basis that we don't think about a few decades ago, which wasn't that long ago, the amount of processed foods that we consume was significantly less. But some of those reasons, the tastiness, the convenience, and the inexpensiveness of this, I want to drill down on a few of those topics and just some of the big picture whys that we're consuming more processed foods. So again, inexpensive. And the reason for that is because primarily the US government provides subsidies to support the corn and soy farmers, right? These crops are foundational ingredients in processed foods and in animal feed. The cheaper processed foods, the subsidies makes it cheaper, producing processed foods and meats leading to lower retail prices. So it's nice that they're less expensive, but unfortunately they're very unhealthy. An example would be like a hamburger that can be priced as low as 99 cents because of subsidies, because of the ingredients that they feed the livestock are subsidized, right? So that hamburger, hypothetical pricing without subsidies, probably cost around $8, that 99-cent hamburger, right? This is one of the reasons why broccoli and spinach and carrots are sometimes a little more expensive than some of the processed foods that you see in the middle of your store or middle of your grocery store, because there's not a lot of subsidies for those healthier foods, unfortunately. Not making the food industry the villains, and that's really important that you understand that. Those people that are business people are trying to make money, and the way they do that is they sell something that's very unhealthy. And I think probably most of us are well aware that a lot of these foods are unhealthy, but there's a lot of scientific knowledge, data, and information that goes into making these hyper palatable foods, i.e. very, very tasty, and certainly with a lot of people, including myself sometimes, somewhat addictive, right? The amounts of sugar, fat, and salt that goes into these processed foods create what's called a bliss points, which leads to addiction for many people, right? So just know that I don't want to blame them. I honestly don't. I just want to look at the big picture and say, these are business people and they have the right to do what they want to do. Same thing with cigarettes. They're not villains. We know and we understand, but know that this isn't necessarily your fault that this is here, but it is something that you have as a problem, if you want to, that you need to address, right? So processed foods are on the rise. Like I said, there's a dramatic shift. Many of those are increasing significantly. Fresh fruits, vegetables, and meats and grains with processed foods make so much smaller portion of overall diet. Unfortunately, and that's the reason that brings a lot of us together, this trend towards increased processed foods has led to and linked to many health concerns, i.e. obesity. In America, I think it's 42% of America is now obese, which is a BMI of over 30. 70% of America is either overweight or obese, right? Diabetes and other chronic diseases. So these processed foods certainly are part of what's going on to cause that, the law of cause and effect, unfortunately, right? So again, just taking a step back, I did some research and I got everywhere from 5 million years to 300,000 years of when the humans that we know today existed, right? So I don't know if it was 5 million, I wasn't there. I don't know if it was 2 million, but I took the lowest number, which is 300,000 years ago. Homo sapiens, human beings that we know today, came into existence about 300,000 years ago. I'm just going to go the shortest to be as conservative as possible. So thinking about what happened 300,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, what are we consuming? We're consuming whole plant foods and animal products. We are not consuming processed foods. In fact, if you look at the evolution of human existence by using the number 300,000 years ago, 99.99% of that time frame, the human existence has been around, our foods have been whole foods, right? We haven't had the manufacturers and the salts and the oils and all those other things. So our bodies have evolved in a diet of whole foods, and the processed foods have really significantly increased tremendously in the last 50 years, but let's just say in the last 150 years, right? Really, a lot of times in the last 50 years. So the percentage of calories we have today, 30% comes from animal products, only 10% come from whole plant foods. And so some of you math wizards out there probably already know that by default, 60% of what we consume in our bodies today, on average, this is in America, is from processed foods. And again, if you step back and you look at the big picture and you think, well, you know what? 99.99% of the time, we're not consuming this stuff. And now today, 60% of our calories come from this stuff because it's incredibly tasty, because it's inexpensive, and because it's convenient. I would say by default, there's probably going to be some problems, right? Chronic disease is the big problem that causes. There's gonna, it's going to affect our systems, and one of the outcomes, unfortunately, of that is going to be disease. So what is a process, and I put food in quotes, right? Just because some people doesn't even really call these foods, just because they're calories and you can eat them doesn't necessarily make it a food. And there's actually a classification system that classifies the different levels of foods as to the degree that they're being processed. And that's called the NOVA food classification system, right? So group 1 is unprocessed or minimally processed foods. And these are the things that happen in the 99.99% of the time, which is basically, foods that are in their natural form, have been submitted to cleaning, removal, inedible or parts, fractioning, grinding, drying, fermenting, right? There's no oils, no fat, no sugar, no substance added to the original food. And some examples, there's 4 classes here. I've got examples in class 1 and class 4, which is the ultra processed. So bulk packaged grains such as brown rice, whole kernel corn, nuts, and other things without salt or sugar, fresh and dried mushrooms. So basically whole plant foods, and also animal products. If you get an animal and chop it up and eat the meat, that's a whole food. It's not a processed food, right? So that would be category 1. Category 2 is where they take these items and they start to process them a little bit, right? So usually for culinary ingredients, these are products that are extracted from natural foods, such as pressing, grinding, crushing, pulverizing, and refining. And they're used to put together in ultra-processed foods. So the categories like oils, fat, salt, and sugar. Group 3 processed foods, then we get a little bit more in the processed stuff. These are derived directly from foods that are recognized as versions of the original food. They're usually consumed as part of or as a side dish in culinary preparations. And then, of course, the ultra-processed foods, right, it's the fourth one. These ultra-processed foods, and I'll show you guys in a minute, like I said, the examples of what some of these are. These are industrial formulations made entirely or mostly from substances extracted from foods, oils, fats, sugar, starch, and proteins, derived from food constituents, hydrogenated fats and modified starch, or synthesized in laboratories from food substrates or other organic substances. Flavor enhancers, colors, several food additives used to make the product hyper-palatable, i.e. tastes very good. Manufacturing techniques include extrusion, molding, and pre-processing by frying. Beverages may be ultra-processed. Group 1 foods are a small portion or even absent completely from the ultra-processed products. So if you look at the example of group 4, which is the ultra-processed products, I'm just going to read you some of these examples: cola, soda, chocolates, candy, ice cream, frozen dessert, pre-prepared pizzas. Let's see here: breakfast cereals, pastries, cakes, cake mix, sweet juices, dairy drinks, including chocolate milk, right? Basically, when I think about these things, I think that all sounds like junk food, okay? And when we get into the ultra-processed data that comes down, this is the stuff that they're talking about when they talk about the data. When they say, if you have some of this processed food, they're talking about the ultra-processed stuff, right? Which gives us a little bit of a reprieve, right? So what is the ultra-processed stuff? Common additives: high fructose corn syrup, not a surprise there, trans fats, MSG, artificial dyes, preservatives, flavor enhancers, chemicals. These typically have a long shelf life, but not necessarily for your shelf life. Little to no nutritional value, higher in calories, low in fiber, high fat, high sugar, high salt. So delicious looking picture, but certainly not very healthy. So one of the studies that came down talked about the effects of ultra-processed foods. This is a meta-analysis that came down, 45 different studies that included 10 million people, right? That shows a clear link between ultra-processed foods, so category 4, and heart disease risks. So those with 10% of their calories coming from ultra-processed foods. You know, every day, I'm just going to give you an example. Every day at 3 p.m., you got to have your slice of chocolate cake, right? If you're doing that on a consistent basis, compared to somebody who doesn't have the ultra-processed foods on a daily basis, they had an increase of dying from heart disease, right? So you might think, okay, so they're having chocolate cake every day on a consistent basis. Their increase of having heart disease is going up because they're having, again, just the chocolate cake, which is basically junk. What percentage do they have of chance of getting dying of heart disease? It's actually 50%, which would really surprise me. I'm thinking 10, maybe 15%, but no, heart disease is actually 50%. So with regards to processed foods, I think about the smoking gun, the smoking man, and the smoking child. And the reason I say that is because we have been blaming heart disease for a long time on the consumption of meat, which makes sense. Obviously on cigarette smoking, which makes sense. But those are all valid, but processed foods also has a significant impact, right? So there may be a time, I don't think so, but there may be a time where you see some of the warnings that you see here on some processed foods. These are warnings that, of course, you see on cigarette smoke about carbon monoxide, increasing chances of lung cancer and heart disease, but it's literally that deadly, right? So anxiety, meta-analysis, the same report when they found the outcomes if you would increase by 1 serving of processed food each day and then getting anxiety in general, what percentage would that be? Does that really affect when you're having more Coke and more cake? Yes. So 53% affects the chances of having anxiety, increased risk of getting anxiety if you're having that one ultra processed food on a daily basis. Another link. So all-cause mortality, and this is the death I was talking about earlier. Same study showed that if you increase, there's a clear link between ultra-processed foods and all-cause mortality. And all-cause mortality is just that the death rate from all causes in a particular population within a specific time frame. So it's not just one cause. It's of these people that have this chocolate cake at 3 p.m. in that group compared to people that don't have the chocolate cake. I'm just using that as an example. What is the chance that those people are going to increase their death rate, right? And the chances increase by 20% because of those ultra processed foods, right? So the second study has 10,000 participants in it. So it's a little bit less of a study. It's not a combination of 45 different studies, basically. And this is cognitive function. And this really, I mean, heart disease impacts me because of my mom's side of the family. Cognitive function on a personal level impacts me because of my dad's side of the family, right? My dad, many of you know, passed away from Alzheimer's in 2019. So this 10,000 participants linked processed food consumption with cognitive decline. Again, one of the motivating reasons why I want to try to eat as healthy as possible. Increased risk is noticeable with daily processed food intake. This is with 2 servings and not just 1. But on average, you have the chocolate cake at 11 a.m. and you have the chocolate cake at 3 p.m. And of course, I'm being facetious, but just thinking about the kinds of foods that were on that list, it's basically junk. It's the crap. It's the candy, right? It's the ice cream. 2 a day. What's your increased risk of cognitive function decline, risk of dementia? 20%, right? So I'm doing what I can do to try to be as healthy as possible. And there is a silver lining as it relates to cognitive function. They were able to show that those people that were eating 20% of their calories, i.e., 2 pieces of chocolate cake a day, were able to counteract the negative effects of the processed foods because they were eating plenty of fruits and vegetables on a daily basis. So just another reason why you want to try to get your fair share of whole plant foods. All right, so a few quotes from the doctors. We'll talk about some strategies to minimize, and then we'll just kind of go back and forth with some of this information, right? So some of these people you may know. This is Dr. Joel Fuhrman, and what does he say about processed foods? The consumption of these nutrient-poor foods not only accelerates aging and reduces brain function, potentially leading to dementia, but also increases susceptibility to depression and mental illness due to the presence of harmful additives and body's production of metabolic waste. That's Dr. Fuhrman. Many of you know Dr. Joel Fuhrman. We talk about Dr. Michael Greger all the time. We are digging our graves with our forks, he says. I can just hear this in his voice. And it's not just the forks, but the spoons that are shoveling processed sugar into our mouths. The food industry has loaded up our supermarket shelves with food-like substances that are not food at all, but highly processed concoctions designed by food scientists, loaded with sugar, fat, and salt. These are not building blocks of what our bodies need to function, but are substances that are leading us down a path of chronic diseases. Pretty straightforward stuff. Dr. Neil Barnard, many of you know him. Processed foods are like the Trojan horses. They come disguised as comfort, but instead they're loaded with elements that can hijack your health. And the last one here was very, very powerful. The Western diet, this is Dr. Brooke Goldner, who wrote Goodbye to Lupus. The Western diet is ultra addictive, ultra processed, and as I showed you in the screenshot earlier, ultra deadly by Dr. Brooke Goldner. All right. So let's get to some good news here. So some strategies for minimization if that's something that you're interested in. The starting point is awareness, right? I think many times in the last 5.5 years as a health and wellness coach, I've talked to my clients about how are they doing with water consumption? How are they doing with meat consumption? How are they doing with vegetable consumption? What's going on with processed foods? And many times they have a general idea, but when they actually track it, it really opens their eyes of being mindful of what they're actually consuming. actually, Mike, I really don't eat too many processed foods. And then they go through 3 or 4 days in a row where they just track it. And just the whole purpose of that is really not to be the police, the food police, but just to build awareness, right? So just tracking consumption is a great way to be mindful of what you're fueling your body with. There's plenty of tools. You got a gentleman on the left-hand side there that's using his Practice Better app that I use as my platform for coaching, and he's putting in there what he had for the day, which basically takes about 90 seconds just to enter that in. And the woman on the right is just tracking it on her journal, right? She's just jotting it down what she's having. So that's just one strategy just to help you to build awareness, so you kind of know where you are, and you can go from there to say, yeah, this is where I'm at and this is where I want to go. Another huge factor is what's going on with your environment, right? So grocery shopping tips, making good whole food, plant-based food decisions, and getting the stuff out of your house. Chef AJ's famous quote is, if it's in your house, it's in your mouth. And I can assure you that that is true in my house. Because if I go through a stressful day, or my wife does, Grace Ann, or what have you, if it's here and we say we're not going to have it, it's probably going to be gone within a week's time. And in general, the house is pretty clean of some of the junkier foods. But if I've got a craving for a candy bar or something, I'm gonna probably eat that candy bar if it's in my house. So building awareness and tracking your food is one, and number two would be controlling your environment, especially the four walls of your house. But it could be work. It could be the people that you associate with. It could be your car. All those things help you and support you in your capacity for better health and wellness. And the last strategy I have is crowding out. Remember, I said before, if you increase your fruits and vegetables, it counteracts the negative effects of having two ultra-processed food substances like chocolate cake or what have you, cookies, snacks, ice cream, as it relates to the cognitive function ability, right? So crowding out is just, what can we do to have less of the bad and more of the good, and being intentional about looking at your plate. And I've got some great AI generated images on your screen of some very, very healthy foods in that capacity, right? So in conclusion, as we close out this presentation and we just open it up for us to just talk about it for a little bit, here is some of the major points. So we talked about the health risks of processed foods, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, cognitive function. Anxiety is really a big one, right? There's so much going on in our world with chaos and stress, and just potentially adding more processed foods can increase your chances of that as well. The importance of awareness. We discuss what potentially tracking or just being intentional about recognizing the fuels that you feed your body, both food as well as liquid, i.e. Coca-Cola or something like that, which is obviously highly processed. And then we talked about just strategies to minimize the consumption of processed foods for better health and wellness overall. I think big picture, before I go to the next slide, I think, there's some disagreement out there as it relates to animal products, right? I think everybody is on the same page and realizes if you eat more, unless maybe you're a certain doctor that I'm not going to mention, if you eat more fruits and vegetables, if you eat more whole grains, 99% of the people are going to say, yes, that's going to be more healthy for me, right? And let's just take the category of animal products and just say, yeah, it's debatable. Some people say that it's healthy and some people say that it's not. So I'm just going to remove that altogether. So we have one category we know we definitely all agree that we should increase. We have one category that's, well, some of us say yes and some of us say no. And the category of processed foods, I think we're probably all in agreement that we should try to minimize this as much as possible, right? It's hard because it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, right? You go to the hardware store to buy a hammer, I always talk about, and you got your Snickers bars right there. It's everywhere. It's in advertising, etc. So it's hard, but remember, just 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, none of this was around, and our genes were pretty much the same as it relates to what we're carrying hereditary wise. Last thing is just crawl, walk, run, right? If you do and you go through yourself, hey, I'm going to track this and I'm going to see what I can do to be more healthy. And you say, okay, where am I at right now? And it's 20%. I don't know the number. You're 2 or 3 out of 10 as far as processed foods, and you want to go to a 1. What does that look like? the chances that you're going to be successful taking small incremental changes over time are going to be greater. That doesn't mean that's the right answer for you, because this is a very personality driven related question or answer. Some people are all or nothing. Some people, they got to do it or they can't do it at all. It can't be a slippery slope in areas of gray. But I recommend crawl, walk, run for many of my clients, because that's typically what most clients find that's successful in the process of making some change, right? So let me just open it up here. So my first question is, after learning about the effects, you guys can unmute yourselves if you would. After learning about the effects of processed foods on health, can you identify one processed food item that you consume regularly you might consider replacing with a healthier alternative? What would that be? So I'm going to, yeah. So feel free to chime in. Let's just dial. I got 3 or 4 questions here we can just talk about for a few minutes. I don't know if you can see that question. Can you see it?
I have something to contribute.
What you got?
So I feel like a lot of, which, I don't know, there's a lot of processed vegan foods out there. And a lot of those food items are probably a lot healthier than a lot of animal products that are out there, but they're still not very healthy in the grand scheme of things, because they're still very processed. So something that Evan and I like to do is make veggie burgers, which are probably highly processed, but very delicious, from the grocery store. So maybe sometimes, instead of making those frozen veggie burgers, we could do like a portobello mushroom.
Nice. Yeah. Or you can make your veggie burgers there in your house, right? With some beans and some
Yeah,
oatmeal.
we could do that too.
Yeah, but that would be more healthy. And I think you're right. There are definitely some of the what we call franken foods, where they're your vegan, your impossible burgers or what have you, that are plant-based, and they're advertised as more healthy because they're plant-based, when in fact they're not more healthy. I
Yeah.
always say that the impossible burger is really great for the environment. It's really great for the animals, but it's not necessarily great for your health, right? So you have to be
Yeah.
really keen on what's going on the back label there with all the additional ingredients and stuff. So really good point, Christina. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else think about
I
this
also
question?
think that like for like oatmeal in particular,
Yeah,
you can get the stuff that's prepackaged and that has all the sugar in it. And then you can kind of make just, plain in the box itself, or then go to like regular rolled oats that are pretty much whole,
right.
or steel cut or whatever. But for myself, to sweeten it so that it's not with brown sugar, we've tried to make some changes, like making date paste and putting that in there, as well as I just buy, like when the strawberry flat truck comes around,
Yeah,
buying a flat of strawberries and freezing them, and then just putting that in with some banana or something.
excellent.
Um, I mean, because otherwise it's so easy to just grab the packets that are already pre-made, but they have so much garbage in them.
Yeah. Yeah, great call out. And I love your describing the different levels of a processed oatmeal, between your oat groats to your rolled oats, or your steel cut oats to your rolled oats to your quick oats, to then you have some of those packages that got your sugar, that's just basically a powdery substance, et cetera. So yeah, great call out. Definitely a great way to sweeten that versus your brown sugar or what have you. So thank you. Anybody else?
Well, I've been using, I have friends that are beekeepers, and I got a big jar of honey from them this year. And so instead of even, trying to do healthier peanut butter sometimes, but peanut butter and strawberry jam and stuff, I just drizzle some of that nice local honey on,
Okay.
like on toast or whatever, and it really um, kind of satisfies, but I really feel like it's a healthier substitute than some of the other things. But I also, like Christina, have I do 2 or 3 probably frozen meals a week that are sometimes, depending what store I go to, I can get, forks over knives, a frozen meal, or occasionally a couple of others that I pick up. Because I take them with me when I go babysit. It's just much easier, 3 minutes in the microwave, 4 minutes. And that's about all I have time for, with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So, and I think I know the answer would be, to get back to cooking more and having more leftovers. But, we've been all of us have been kind of lazy, but, and we've gotten more takeout than we normally have. So I know that, that's not the greatest thing in the world, but, it's time to tighten it up a little bit.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. It's just that convenience factor is, especially with you got these 2 beautiful babies. You do not have, a lot of times you don't have an hour to go through and prep all these stuff or what have you.
Right.
You're going all the time. It does take initiative, et cetera, but it's a good point that makes these less than healthy foods a lot more appealing just because of the convenience factor. It's so nice to be able to throw something in the microwave for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or what have you, and you're good to go. But
Right.
great call out. Thank you. Cool. Beverly Westberg.
Well, for sure, ice cream. Because with, the Dairy Queen, then you dip it in chocolate. Then you go to the Baskin and Robbins, and there's just all kinds of delicious stuff.
Yeah.
And so the ice cream going to the nice cream is really, I think, phenomenal because it's delicious and you can basically create any flavor that you want.
Yeah.
With the frozen bananas and the frozen fruit.
About ice cream. I'm not sure. I know what you mean by it, but I'm not sure everybody listening knows what that is.
Well, whenever the bananas are starting to get spotty, and even before if you want, but you freeze your bananas, you take them out of the peels and put them in your bag and freeze them in the freezer. And then you use that as the base for your ice cream in the blender or whatever. And then you can add, we can add any kind of fruit, which is delicious, but even adding cocoa powder or, the flavors of maybe vanilla powder or whatever. Anything makes it delicious. You can really pretty much, not 100% obviously, because you don't have the fat, but you can create a lot of the great flavors of wonderful ice cream.
Yeah, no doubt.
Oh, that's one. And then another one that I think is a big one for me, because I also like baked goods a lot. So I've been doing a lot occasionally with just taking like this, either the sweet potatoes or the black beans, and making like chocolate. Well, with the garbanzo beans recently, I've gotten into chocolate hummus because I'd had some chocolate hummus, which is actually pretty healthy, but it also had the, what do you call it? Tahini oil or whatever.
Correct.
And so with the chickpeas, you put the dates in there. Now you got to get them really wet so that they don't kill your blender or whatever. But so the dates and then cocoa powder or whatever, and they're delicious. To me, it's a transition kind of, but it's really not just a transition. It really does satisfy sometimes that chocolate fix or that whatever. And the same thing with sweet potatoes, black bean brownies. There's some really, one of the things I think that's been really cool with going the whole food plant-based route is there are so many interesting experiments that are pretty wonderful.
Yeah. It's fun to food, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. All right. So next question. How do you feel about the comparison between eating processed foods and smoking cigarettes in terms of long-term health risks? Does this comparison change your perspective on processed food consumption? What do you guys think?
For myself, it scares me because I think I'm pretty healthy. I don't smoke. I drink maybe once a month, that kind of thing. But thinking of the processed foods as just being as dangerous is kind of frightening.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. That definitely changed my perspective. I'm still going to have processed foods. I'm not going to smoke cigarettes, but I'm still going to have processed foods from time to time. But it's like, wait a minute. It gives me a pause and gives me a second thought. So yeah, Kimberly, it's a great call out. Anybody else?
Well, one of the things that they talk about with smoking, this is sort of a kind of off the subject thing, but they talk about the secondhand smoke.
Right.
Well, the processed foods, I'm a secondhand enabler
There you go.
when I give it to other people or to kids, which I've done
Sure.
all my life.
Right.
And so it makes me rethink. I've got to rethink some of that, you know, and it's not easy and it's not necessarily fun because there's a lot of fun that goes with some of that processed food,
And
you know.
absolutely. It's a culture and as a tradition. We've shown our kids that we love them by giving them Easter candy and giving them Halloween candy and giving them birthday cakes. And that's not to say that we have to eliminate all that stuff to zero, but yeah, Bev, I think that's why I put that about your child, you know, your smoking gun, your smoking man, your smoking child is, well, wait a minute, children don't smoke, but there's a level of health that's being impacted there. And it's all with the best of intentions. We love these kids, of course. But we have to kind of we have to rethink a little bit. We got to shift our thinking, I think, in my opinion, a little bit to say, you know, do we have to give them Twinkies every time grandma comes over to give our little kid a hug? Do we have to be giving them a Twinkie? Well, probably not, right? And I'm not being sarcastic. I just want, when you think about the big picture here, what's happening to impact, it's not healthy. There's so many chemicals and so many really unhealthy things that are in there.
Well, and another thing, as a teacher,
Mhm.
I've seen incredible impact of kids that are going to lunch and eating their red hot fries or whatever,
Yeah,
and coming back literally bouncing off the walls,
yeah,
angry, in fights, you know. And when you know, if I was teaching high school and kids went out and smoked a cigarette, they might come back in calmer.
right.
But when they're going out and getting their processed junk,
Yeah,
they're coming in more aggressive, more hyped up, you know, more anxious, and just makes the entire environment.
yeah.
Um,
It really matters, right?
yeah, it does. I think it's bigger than we realize. I mean, I know Dr. Goldner has said that recently, and Dr. Foreman's fast food genocide book that he just came out with.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, I think it's much, much bigger than we have even tapped into at all.
Gotcha.
Anyway.
Yeah, great point. Anybody else on this one? Okay. Has anyone ever tried to significantly reduce or eliminate processed foods from their diet? If so, what challenges did you face and how did you overcome them? Maybe one or two people share on this one.
I did this for 7 days with my mom a couple years ago when we did Whole 30.
Okay.
But
Tell
I
us-
intentionally said I'm not doing Whole 30, I'm doing Whole 7. And I think I lost weight just because it felt like there was so little to choose from. Like everything has sugar in it, which was
Right.
one of the things you couldn't have. So I
Right.
think even just like condiments, like thinking about ketchup and mayo, which I use
Mhm.
all the time, even though they're not animal products, that's still
Sure.
considered processed. So that was a struggle. And
Yeah.
how did I overcome them? Great question. I tried to make homemade mayo and homemade ketchup, and it did not go well. So if I ever do that again, I'll have to just find a better recipe, I think.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I forgot about Whole 30 that you and mom did for a while there. So yeah, one of
One
the
thing
things about that is just the minimizing of processed foods. Go ahead, Beth.
One of the things I did with my son, which was helpful, and you actually pointed out to me, Mike, that I lost the best weight when I did that, was a compliance challenge and the compliance for him, it was alcohol. And for me, it was ultra processed foods.
Okay.
Or processed foods is what we really went. And I couldn't do it with just the processed foods. I could do it more with the ultra processed. But you know, so it's really I think for me, this is still a continuing challenge, the ultra processed and the processed, but
Right.
it's getting better. But I think that's where the substitutes, like, you know, using dates or dates with pecans on them, just little whatever sweet things,
Right.
are calling me to try to find good substitutes. Again, good environmental control.
Yeah, definitely. Very good. Very good. All right. All right. Last couple questions here is considering the strategies discussed for minimizing processed food consumption, which one do you think would be easiest or most challenging to implement in your daily life and why? Thinking about those strategies. So the strategies were tracking. What was another strategy we had? We had crowding out, right? And what was the second one? Crowding out, tracking, and your environment, right? So those are your three. Of those three, what comes to mind is maybe something where you think would be the easiest, and what would be something that would be maybe more challenging for you?
Well, the easiest is controlling the environment at home and in the car.
Okay.
I don't work anymore, so that's not an issue. But the most challenging is being with other people that are very much into the whole process. I mean, not the whole, the processed foods.
Yeah.
And the ultra processed foods, and being with them and being social, being involved with them socially. It's really difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. So the social aspect of it makes it really difficult when you're going out, hanging out with other people or what have you. Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because sometimes, like you said, for you, it's all individual, of course, but for you, the environment piece is probably the easier because within the four walls of your house, especially support from Bob and the capacity of trying to fuel your body with healthy plant-based foods. Ironically, for some of my clients, that's actually the most difficult part because they don't have that spouse that is as supportive, I guess, if you will. So it's just interesting how different challenges affect people differently, right? Anybody else on this one? Okay, last question. How can we as a community support each other in making healthy food choices in an environment that heavily promotes processed foods? What do you guys think? What comes to mind? You can either share it online or maybe put it in the chat. What can we do to support each other in making healthier food choices in this somewhat difficult environment of 60% of the calories that we're consuming are from processed foods, which is pretty bad. What do you guys think?
Well, I like, and we haven't done it as much in the Facebook group, but I really like it when people share something they've tried
Yeah.
or a recipe or whatever. I've actually, I don't know, Mike, you made some healthy cookies a couple years ago, and I tried them and they were really good. Just because I like, and I need variety, and I just can't eat the same thing every day. So
Right.
if I see something and it sparks my interest, I might want to make it. So I think that I would encourage everybody on here, when you find a cool recipe or you try something you haven't done in a long time, and go ahead and post a picture of it. And, that is more encouraging than me taking a frozen
Love that.
vegan dinner out of my freezer.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Cool. Anybody else?
Well, I think like going to, when we are going into social situations, like I'm going to the Eclipse next week. We've got the processed foods, but we've also got some plans for a ton of veggie fruit, different things, like we're doing a sunshine plate with all veggies, and then, or an Eclipse plate with all veggies, and then an Eclipse plate with all fruit. So that should be kind of interesting and fun. But and I want to get to a point at one point in my life where I have a party with all you guys, bring everybody to my house, and everything is compliant and wonderful. Maybe a fantasy, but
That's wonderful. We'd love that. Very cool. Very cool. So some great stuff there. Last couple of comments I want to make as we close out. Thank you so much, Beverly, for those comments. Looking at your packages, I didn't say this in the presentation, I probably should have, but when you look at your packages, right, you want to look at the number of ingredients, right? How many ingredients is there? If it has a boatload of ingredients as a processed food, it's probably most definitely less healthy, right? because it's got lots of oils and sugars and dyes, etc. So let that be one of the ways that you can say to yourself, is this something that I want to consume or not? The other thing is looking at breads. A bread's a good example. We've talked about fiber and ratios with fiber, but if you look at bread, if it sits on the counter and in a day it starts to mold, that's a good thing because it doesn't have a lot of preservatives in it, right? So you want to keep that bread in the refrigerator like your Ezekiel breads, versus some of these other breads that will stay on your counter for a week and a half because they've got so many extra additive ingredients, again, to increase the shelf life of the product, but not necessarily your shelf life specifically. So the last two things I want to say is, we talk about the percentage, 60% processed foods, 30% animal products, 10% whole plant foods, right? And whatever we can do to increase the number that we all agree upon, that's the most nutritious one there, which is your fruits and your vegetables and your whole grains and such, your nuts and seeds, the better. So what happens when we go from 10% to 20% or 10% to 50%? And the processed foods goes from 60% to 30%. I guess my overall simplistic message is this is definitely not about perfection. So when you see numbers like, oh my God, only one piece of chocolate cake a day, and now I got heart disease, that can be a little bit intimidating. But big picture, this is about progress, right? We're not looking for perfection. That's not reality. We're looking for progress to help you in your health and wellness goals for the long term. Okay. So having said that, I guess I keep hearing there's some type of eclipse or something coming up. I'm going to do some research after today's call and do some research on that and see if it's going to be sunny that day. Hopefully it will. But really, really appreciate y'all's comments, y'all's chiming in, and everybody being on the call. Okay.
So more
Okay.
plants, better health.
Moreplantsbetterhealth.com. That's exactly right. All right, guys. You take care. So good to see everybody. God bless.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.